9 mobile phone telcos got compromised, and some people associate those attacks to the Chinese government. And a lot of data was stolen. Time to learn all about it. My name is Lieuwe Jan Koning, and from the Security Operations Center floor here at Onto we bring you Threat Talks, the deep dive. The subject of today is Salt Typhoon. Let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me start by introducing my two guests of today. On my right-hand side, it's Jeroen Scheerder. He is a security researcher, privacy specialist, whatnot, very knowledgeable on many technical subjects. Welcome, Jeroen. And Rob Maas, who is the field CTO of Onto and his job is to make sure that for our customers, no breaches happen. And today you're gonna have to defend the CISO of, let's say, the telco Robco. That was part of this breach. We'll see about that. Gentlemen, this is a big thing that recently emerged. Who can explain to me what is this Salt Typhoon?
Well, let me try. Salt Typhoon is a collective name for a massive data breach involving communications data. It involves 9 US telecom companies. The data stolen was data obtained by something called lawful interception, so snooping on personal communications, which is sort of a hobby of some people. Privacy and security advocates, of course, always keep hammering on the notion that if you want secure communications, do not introduce backdoors and certainly do not steal data and expose them somewhere. So basically, that's what happened.
Just for clarity, what you mean is that for reasons of investigation or whatever, there's a tap on phone or data or that, and that's the system that plays a role in this attack?
Yes. Dangerous hobby is stealing people's data. Mm-hmm. Data gets stored somewhere, data gets stolen.
Okay.
So, and it's there's a sort of pattern. Why would you be responsible for your own stupidity if you can blame the Chinese government? So let's call it the Chinese government. But I think here we can also pinpoint at some things that, you can call them stupid, but let's call them suboptimal choices here.
I forgot to mention that Jeroen is a typical Dutch guy, and that's an unfiltered way of putting things, but it's really clear what he means. Thank you.
I think I've been nuanced here because much harsher things can be said. But anyway, so let's dive into the anatomy of the attack. Mm-hmm. So I think the core of the issue is that data that you shouldn't have is there, and that data exists in infrastructures where it is inevitably exposed at some point if you put in the effort to access it. The effort to access it, of course, gets diminished the lower the barrier of entry. And the abetting circumstances is that the hackers breaching the data got access to these telcos infrastructure by using exploitable, publicly exposed services. Sorry for that. So, for example, one of the big boo-boos, and I think it's a sort of common theme. Someone uses Microsoft Exchange and get breached. I mean, and that's just an immediate consequence.
So how do you get from breaching an exchange to go into a system that is there to do a phone tap?
Yes. There's the attackers in this case used, you could almost call it a see whatever sticks approach. They had a vast bucket of malware samples. So remote access tools and command and control stuff, botnets, lateral migration stuff, host exploitation stuff, just a whole number of them. I'll name a few. So there's a Ghost Spider and Snappy Bee and the Mazel remote access tool and Demodex and Sparrowdoor. And the hacker community has such names, right? So Cobalt Strike is also something which is sort of well known, which is a command and control framework. So you get access to a publicly exposed service, and you are able to inject something there, your initial foothold. And then you just throw to the wall whatever sticks, and you expand your reach within that network. So you move from that exposed server that you breached to another. You steal credentials, you elevate privileges, you become administrator in a Windows domain, for example, and you use that privilege to access other hosts. And a few steps down the line, you get to access systems that store this highly confidential data that shouldn't be there in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, can we talk a little bit about the kind of data that was stolen, Rob? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So in the beginning, they talk about call detail records. So that's basically saying who called who. So if I call you, then that's being stored, but not the call itself. But sometimes the government agencies also want to know what we actually executing in the communication, what kind of exchange do we have, and what is the content of the conversation. And if there was a tap, that data was there as well, and that's also being stolen. So because they were in the network, all telecom related data could have been stolen. But
so it's a metadata of all calls, but more specifically, the data that agencies collected of criminals, for example. Let's assume that's the use case here for now. That data is not just with those, let's say, the FBI, but also outside the country.
It's now with the attackers,
exactly.
which we assume
is
that
kind of data.
You call them criminals, but in fact they were mainly US government officials, which I think is not technically the right nomenclature. And I think we need to be more specific about these CDR data, because that does contain data on who talks to whom, where they are, how long they're talking, and it exposes patterns. And of course, the fact that you talk to someone else can already be compromising. The location where you are might be doubly so. So it is in principle, this is already someone that you can use to extort someone with.
Yeah, extortable behavior is certainly very apparent.
Yes.
But also, I mean, if you have a secret source somewhere, I mean, as a journalist, for example, I can imagine that's also really...
Yes. It exposes your identity, of course, or it can be revealing.
Yeah, because if you're talking to someone, an informant for the press, for example, and that person then... you know that phone number, you know then where that person goes, and probably the location where that person is the most, or at night, probably where the person lives, right? So that's the kind of data we're talking about.
Yes, and of course there's this transitive closure, A talks to B, and immediately after B talks to C, then that can be some sort of indication that B is talking to C on behalf of A.
Yeah.
So there's that pattern of behavior, which is also revealing and
it's a little bit like if you're using chat apps or WhatsApp or whatever, and constantly share your location with everybody around you, including the internet, and then for and you're then able to click through to the next person you're talking to and also see what he's done, and historically that's what the CDR data exposes. And then the content of the calls, isn't that encrypted?
No, in this case not. So the calls and most data, maybe if there were services that were end-to-end encrypted, so if they were using the data of those telco providers, it can be encrypted. So if you use WhatsApp or iMessage, for example, end-to-end, so iMessage to an iMessage phone, then it is encrypted, and then they can store the data, but then still they need to figure a way to decrypt it. But if you have the regular calls or SMS, those are all unencrypted.
I just have a lot of questions. Sorry, I know you guys want to talk about how it happened and how to prevent all this, but I still want to, how do we know it's why I mentioned in the introduction it's associated with China? Why do people think this? Do we know?
Not a clue.
No?
No, that's the most news companies will point to a nation state, because the data, especially the CDR data, for example, is because you want to focus on journalists or maybe government personnel, and it's of interest, of course, for the US government, but also for the other states that might want to.
But the US government already has it because it's their tapping system that is.
If they have the tap,
right?
indeed, So it is probably an outside nation state which wants to influence what's going on in the nation.
But is this a matter of, okay, it must be China, or is it do we really know?
No, I actually think it's a question. This getting this data should have been really hard. So it must have been a very complex attack.
Yeah, okay.
So let's pretend it was an adversary actor with high capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all these this chain of reason is suspicious, because I don't think the attack was that advanced.
Maybe also good to know that the initial access you already mentioned, Exchange was one of the ways to get in, but Ivanti was another one.
Yeah.
There are all known vulnerabilities by now. Maybe not when they were used in the first time, because we know they were in already for a long time. But in the end, it means that those systems were all connected to each other without proper segmentation, for example. So once you got the initial access by a vulnerability, it was quite easy to get to this data.
No, I get it. So that part, but the persistence and it's 9 telcos. I mean, that sounds like it's not like a script kiddie that does it. So it's more advanced than
no,
that.
it's at least we know it's targeted. Okay. Otherwise, it wouldn't be 9
I'll
telecoms.
stop asking questions right now. So you were saying, Jeroen, initial access, for example, through Exchange.
Yes, or the Ivanti VPN or the Sophos firewall, known vulnerabilities. And they were present for months. So this, of course, raises questions. How was it discovered? And how actually were telcos then be able to state that we are now free from this adversarial access? That's also, I struggle with that.
Okay, but before we get to that, the point of entry was known vulnerabilities, credential theft maybe?
In step 2, the first thing you do is gain access, and then you use another vulnerability to elevate your privileges. You use that to enumerate, for example, the domain and obtain additional users. And you use local cache files containing credentials, or you sniff some sessions, or you read them from memory in a computer. All these things, you just extract additional credentials. Once you have that foothold, using this spatter of tools that you throw to the wall and some stick.
Rob, there's already a lot of things that should have been done, could have been done, I think.
Yeah.
As the CISO of Robco. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the first thing, assuming that the attackers came in after the vulnerabilities were already disclosed, was of course patching, especially if you have products that are there on the edge. We talked that a lot before. Your VPN access, for example, or your Exchange server. If a vulnerability comes out for these products, make sure you patch as soon as possible. So
we recently jokingly said that 2024 was the year of the VPNs that
there were a lot of
vulnerable.
them. Yeah, there were a lot of them, and some vendors really got a bad year, let's say. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which also talked about a lot already, is make sure that it is segmented. And also, if you have these devices, let's say you have a firewall that's providing VPN access, don't use that same firewall for your segmenting of your network. Segment those two functions. So really go to a zero trust approach. And also, once you got in, people should not be able to go directly to the segment where the data is that you're after. So also make a strict segment of it, put strict policies in place. It will all make it much harder to get to that data.
Yeah. And this is not what has been done within those telcos.
As far as we know, at least.
Do we know how they eventually got to those systems? Why aren't those systems like fully isolated, air-gapped or whatnot?
In the end, if you have a network of systems that provide functionality, there will be communication channels. So services in your network will have some level of exposure, and there will be vulnerabilities. And of course, if you insufficiently apply zero trust, then the level of exposure will be high, but it will never be zero. So I guess that's the basic question. And of course, many of the services used to transfer data and network are known to be vulnerable. For example, file sharing services, at least some of them, have known weaknesses in the way they are employed within networks. They can be strengthened, and more often than not, they aren't. So that's and that means that an attacker once inside a network, even if it's segmented, as long as he can piggyback on those necessary information streams, he can still move laterally and do malevolent stuff if there's insufficient protection and hardening going on there.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing I should note here, and that's I think is somehow relevant. Sometimes you have these stage attacks in which the attackers actually have to inject their own code and bring lots of extra tools on board. This attack was mainly used by employing so-called living off the land techniques. Mm-hmm. So it used functionalities present on the systems that were abused. For example, the scripting subsystems of Windows hosts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which we all know is enabled by default.
Of course. And there may be a reason why it's there, but it also happens that these things are just enabled by default, do not serve any purpose, but do not get disabled anyway. And that leaves, of course, ample room for attackers to use these things as step-ups.
Yeah, because what you're saying here, if you have like an MDR tool or what kind, some kind of endpoint protection, and since you're not installing malware by yourself as an attacker, that part of the product doesn't help you here because it will not detect anything malicious because
it's already
PowerShell.exe is there, and
yes.
That's vetted because it's provided by Microsoft, and it does what it does. Indeed, including what do we do against that, Mr. CISO?
You have two options here. First, like Jeroen already said, make sure those tools are disabled, not installed, removed, policies around it. You can do a lot to really harden a system, but often because it's easier to just go with a plain vanilla install, it's overlooked. But that's the first thing to do. The second thing which can help is an EDR solution which detects behavior. So if you never start PowerShell and now you start running PowerShell frequently, that should raise an alert. Hey, this user is now doing PowerShell, please investigate. The downside of behavior, of course, is that it also comes with some false positives. So you really need to investigate if there is really something going on.
This team for
exactly. Yeah,
figure that out. Yeah. Okay.
So
lateral movement was easy, or easy enough apparently, because 9 companies.
Doable.
Yeah.
And by the way, once you're inside such a telco network, the attackers stumbled upon not just the data of the telco, but that these telcos have relations with other companies through VPNs, for example. And if you're moving laterally, there's nothing to stop you there. So servers from third parties also got compromised, containing similar data. Because once you start intercepting data, of course, you need to analyze them, and there's a market for that. So there's lots of data, and it's widely spread. And it's up for grabs through this network of business relations. So that's what happened.
Yeah, now you're talking about our CDR data. So it wasn't just in the company.
Well, CDR and of course just plain communication data, because the lawful interception the facility allows capturing focused traffic. Mm-hmm. So I think in some reports mention a few hundred, let's say 150 or 200 specific targets, mainly within U.S. government and some in big multinationals. So these individuals' communications that were of special interest, they got tapped a bit closer than the Joe average phone user. So the CDR data is probably pretty complete for everyone, but your communications might be of more interest, and all your traffic might be stored somewhere.
Yeah, so how this works then is that government says, hey, listen, you got to store this stuff. So it's not like the FBI brings in a box and says, hey, put this in your network, and here's the telco machine. Let's connect this cable, and now I'm collecting all this data, and this is a and there's an antenna going in or a fiber optic to our headquarters, and this is how we collect the data.
Well, in a way it is, because in telco land, there has been this push from surveillance agencies, so the NSA and the FBA and so on, to include functionality in communications devices. So it's not a separate black box, but it's the small black box that's in the box that you're actually
but that's
buying.
my point. That it's not like a separate thing that you can pinpoint. No, it's the
it's-
telco itself that needs to collect this on behalf of the agencies.
Yes.
And therefore it's on their system. So if you hack into the telco systems, you have the data that's supposed to be with the authorities.
Yes, so this dangerous functionality is just embedded in stuff that you have as a telco, but also as a regular company, because it's just in your switches and in your routers. And there is an interface to enable it. And there's an interface to extract the data, which is sort of hush and secret. And that's where communication takes place between the FBI and the NSA and the CIA and so on.
How would you architect this, Rob? If there was a telco?
This is a bit of a hard question because it's kind of implementing a backdoor, although we say we have a good function for it. So then you would say it's a feature instead of a backdoor.
Yeah, backdoor with reason.
A backdoor with reason, indeed. But having a backdoor is always a bad idea, especially when it comes to security, because in the end, people will find the backdoor and will abuse it. And I think that's what exactly is happening here. We have this feature because the authorities want to have the ability to tap the traffic. It should always be only be used by these authorities, but now people find a way to get access to this functionality. So now they use it as kind of a backdoor to get that data out.
Do you think it's the responsibility of the telcos to secure this?
I think that's a hard question. If it is mandatory to have that capability, then you cannot do anything as a telco about it because you need to comply with what your government tells you to do when it comes down to it. But yeah, it would be good to have a fight about it. I think maybe in relation with this, we have a fight here in Europe and also in the US about having backdoors with WhatsApp, iMessage, for example, because the authorities also want to do a feature to get into that traffic. For now, we can still fight it off. And the nice thing about at least this hack is that now even the authorities say, okay, if you really want to be secure, you need to use Signal, WhatsApp, or iMessage and end-to-end encryption. But still, the debate on having for a future backdoor there is still going on. And I don't think there's a safe way to do that.
No, and the fallacy is truly, it's deep and it's widespread and it's very simple because it's a very strange assumption once you look at it, that you can actually implement a covert backdoor that for somehow magically only the good guys can use. This is just...
That is proof that that's not the case.
This is an example, but I think it's fundamentally not the case. Once you build a backdoor, it's there.
Okay, we're not going to change, unfortunately, how the government wants to, what data the government wants. We also can change the telcos, but maybe there's something we can do ourselves. So what if you are in a company or a private person and you know that all your phone data, the CDR data, can be leaked and also maybe your spoken voice? What should we do about it? So if you are walking around in the United States somewhere, which is true for most of us, what should you do?
Well, I think we already mentioned the end-to-end encryption. That helps at least for the content of your data. Use iMessage and then only make sure that you have, I believe it is blue if you iMessage, and that it not turns green if you communicate with another device. Because if you do iMessage to an Android device, for example, it will
be SMS and insecure.
Yeah.
Same thing for WhatsApp. WhatsApp can be end-to-end encrypted, but it implies that all participants in that communication did opt in, which is not always the case.
How can you see that?
That's the hard thing. I would not use WhatsApp. I don't use WhatsApp. So use Signal.
But also for calls, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the content of the calls and of your messages. So that's then properly encrypted.
Yeah.
Well, until we'll have a different episode about quantum
yes, of course.
Encryption, quantum safe encryption. But that's whole. I mean, always assume that everything you encrypt today in 10 years will be readable to the world.
Yeah, true.
That's something not many people realize, but that's a different threat talk.
Yeah.
So then you're the content of your conversations and the content of your messages are.
Yes, and there's also that level of signals intelligence that tells you that tells someone that you're actually doing something, exactly. and if he gets the data which associates your phone with the cell tower, he also has your position and so on.
Yeah. How do you make that go away?
Burner phones and balaclavas.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you have that, honestly.
No,
Oh.
I don't. That was a joke.
Oh.
But I think one lesson we should learn as individuals that we are targets of surveillance systems, and that in the end there is a limitation to the things we can do to actually escape surveillance.
No. So be a good boy. That's
No?
the best advice.
I don't.
It's always if you
I don't even know what
ask
that
my mom. Being a good boy is
Yes.
really important, Jeroen.
Okay, it's very important, but I get the joke, of course, and it's true in a sense, except that no one gets to define what a good boy does and is, and history tells us anything that this is a very shifting and dangerous notion.
Yeah. So, but what you're saying then is that the fact that that CDR data, so who am I talking to and when and where am I? If you own a phone, it's unavoidable. Let alone if you have a smartphone and you enable a Google product on it or Facebook or
There's no way to completely avoid it. No.
Yeah, well, don't do stupid stuff is a good rule, right?
Yeah. It's always a good rule.
Yeah.
But in the end, yes, and burner phones, by the way, would work if you change your phone every day or so.
Yeah, and it's hard to connect the dots.
It gets
harder
to unify your profile. Yes,
but that would mean that you really buy a new phone every time, and a new number and all of that. And
it sort of limits your social life.
Impossible.
Yes.
Yeah. Impossible in today's society. Okay, but at least the thing we can do is make sure. Well, even make phone calls over Signal.
Yeah,
yes,
that helps.
And there is an approach as some people use, which is doable or not. But one thing that you don't have if you have signals intelligence, and military do this, by the way. So you have contacts in a combat situation, and one of the things that you need to avoid is that intensity of contact signifies heightened activity. So what happens there is that there's always a constant level of communication, and some of that communication is meaningful, and some of it isn't. But
it would be a nice feature for Signal to make. I mean, if I so what I'm saying is that my phone and your phone should constantly, every hour communicate or so in random intervals, and then when we actually have a call, it doesn't show the difference.
Yes, so there is a sort of heartbeat, and there's no statistical diversion from that heartbeat if we exchange actual information, which is also somewhat limiting, but you can think along that way if you want to buy something that really obfuscates your activities.
Do you know any apps that already do this? Is this readily available, or is it really difficult to do today?
It's costly to do, I think, because it expands your data usage significantly. Okay. So you can do it for simple things.
Yeah, but I mean, certain branches of journalism would certainly want this, I think.
I guess, yes.
Okay. Well, guys, you didn't make me feel more comfortable today, honestly. And maybe that's
just talk to an actual person without a phone.
Oh yeah, we can always try that.
I think there's a positive message here. And the positive message here is even those proposing all these secret backdoors now have understood that there are downsides to it. And I don't think they have turned the corner yet, because they're now still in La La Land, in which they say they will still want some inspection facility only available to good guys. We know that's just nonsense, but they've seen the problem. It's out there, so that's maybe a good thing.
Okay, well, let's see how this plays out. I'm also curious. We might have another deep dive later when we know more about this whole thing, because it's relatively fresh and not much data yet, kept a secret. I mean, one of the things I also understood is that it's really hard to erase the problem, because the equipment is so old and it's unpatchable and all that. So it's probably still there today, and it's hard to get rid of, which is terrible in itself. So we'll probably learn more from this in the coming months, years maybe, and we'll see. Maybe we'll revisit later. Gentlemen, thank you very much for making this clear to us. And to our audience, thank you very much for tuning in. If you liked this episode, please like it, and because the effect of it will be that more people will get it in their timeline, and that's good for everyone, we think. And if you liked the following Threat Talks, you can also press the subscribe button, because that means that next Tuesday, once again, you will get our next episode in your inbox, and we would love for you to listen to that one as well. If you have any feedback, mail it to team@threat-talks.com, and at threat-talks.com there's also a lot of more information available on every Threat Talk that we do. From the Security Operations Center here at headquarters of Onto It, we say goodbye to you and thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Onto It Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.